welcome to the Techstrong AI podcast. I'm Amanda Razani. I'm excited to be here today with Scott Stevenson. He is the CEO and co-founder of Spellbook. How are you?
Doing awesome. Thanks for having me, Amanda.
Well, that name is so interesting. Can you share a little bit about Spellbook and what services do you provide?
Sure. So Spellbook was the first sort of generative AI co-pilot for lawyers. We launched back in 2022, and the name came from this idea of giving lawyers like a magical spell book that they could cast to help them do document and drudgery. We mainly help with contract drafting and review. So a lot of what our product does is helping lawyers find issues in contracts, like say 100-page legal agreements, and helps fix them or helps tell them when something is kind of off from normal. We help them draft and do a whole bunch of other things. We have over 2,500 law firms and in-house teams using us today. Customers seem to love the product so far.
Wonderful. That's a lot. Well, I don't think that we've ever talked about how AI is impacting lawyers and the legal industry, I don't believe, on this show. So can you share from your experience, how are legal teams using AI?
Yeah. So we primarily service transactional lawyers. So that's lawyers who are working on commercial transactions like sales transactions, setting up companies, employment agreements, real estate, all of these sorts of things. So, and the other side of law, litigation. So we don't deal in litigation. I would say one stat I will mention at the high level is AI is being adopted 5 times faster by law firms than the cloud was. So it is being adopted incredibly quickly across all practice areas of law, and faster than almost any technology has been adopted since maybe like email or word processors. So that's how big it is. And at a high level, I think there was a lot of sort of pent up potential energy. Lawyers wanted to adopt technology for a long time, and nothing really helped them that much because what lawyers deal with all day is unstructured text. And most software out there, like say CRM software, other sorts of like everything out there that has come out over the past like decade has really been a lot of database software, which is good for like categorizing structured information. And law is the opposite of that. It's big documents of unstructured text. And when we started our company, we're actually originally called Rally. We were another company trying to shove legal text into a structured format. We had a templating engine where a lawyer trying to make an employment agreement could create a template and then, push out, say, employment agreements really quickly using this templating engine. And it just never worked very well because lawyers would always say, well, the deal I'm working on is too bespoke. My work is really bespoke for my clients, and any kind of templating or automation is just not doing it for me. And this has resulted in legal fees staying like really surprisingly high for a long time because no technology really helped lawyers that much. And then generative AI came along and totally changed the game overnight because all of a sudden we could help lawyers with unstructured text. We could help them find issues in unstructured text. We could help them draft unstructured text. We could help them understand and ask questions about unstructured text. And that's what they're doing all day. And it's all of those things that I just talked about are how AI is being adopted today. And I think there was so much drudge work built up in this industry. I think it's a lot of our investors talked about it as like one of the last unturned rocks. It's like software never figured out how to help lawyers until very, very recently with AI. It's used to really almost, in some cases, 10x the speed and efficiency and accuracy of things like contract reviews. That's where we see it being used most. So say you're doing a big M&A transaction, there could be millions of dollars at stake. You might have 20 core agreements that you're working on, like a share purchase agreement and a voting agreement and investor rights agreement. And then you might have a data room of the company that's being acquired and say an M&A, that has thousands of legal documents in it. And if one document in there has something that's wrong, it could blow up the whole deal, or it could be too big a risk to take on. So AI helps in this type of transaction tremendously. One, in those thousands of documents, it can help highlight, a game-changing or kind of critical issue that's going to block the deal, it's going to help in the drafting of those like 20 really complex, sensitive agreements, and in making sure all the right data gets in there, and also it's going to help in the negotiation process so that both sides know they're getting like a fair deal or a decent legal document that's normal and not off in some important way. So I really think it's a true like 10x to 100x gain in value for the clients of law firms as well. So yeah.
Yes, I can't even imagine having to read through pages and pages and pages of text and or write them, and how much more efficient it would be using generative AI.
Yeah, it's way more efficient. Yeah. And like the scariest thing that I always think about, like the drafting text is difficult. But the scariest thing is when you're a lawyer and your client hands you a 100-page document and they say, hey, can you review this and make sure nothing's wrong? It's like, where do you start on that problem as a lawyer? Are you going to boil a pot of coffee and then read through 100 pages and make sure that there's nothing, dangerous in that agreement? That's literally what you used to have to do. And now with AI, you have this extra layer of checking that can happen where within, say, 10 seconds, you can find out that on page 80, this contract says you're giving up rights to your intellectual property that you didn't know you were giving up. And yeah, it's totally game changing.
So is it right now just an extra layer, an extra tool? Is it still necessary to have a human also still read through all of that? How accurate would it be to just let generative AI handle all of it?
So one thing I mentioned is we do not let generative AI handle all of it. We don't recommend that our customers do either. Our UI is built to be, we say it's like an electric bicycle for lawyers. So when a lawyer is using our product, we're giving them suggestions that they are reviewing, and they have to go through and review every suggestion and say, yes, I agree with it, or no, I don't. There's never a point where our tool is just kind of doing everything and says, here you go, here's the result. And that's a really important part of our product design. And this is one of the issues with ChatGPT. Like ChatGPT is great for certain things, but it kind of just spits out answers to you, and you can take it or leave it. Whereas in our product, we take each suggestion and we say, hey, it's a suggestion. And you ultimately need to decide whether it's a good one or not. I think that's really important. And I think we'll see more products designed that way in the kind of months and years ahead.
So it is improving the outcomes, but is it still also speeding up the outcome and reducing the amount of work time?
Yeah, it depends on the type of transaction and whether it's work time sensitive, but I would say yes, in many cases, it can cause transactions to be completed much, much faster. And it's also improving the work product at the same time because, yeah, like I was talking about with, say, a 100-page agreement, a human just is not very good at finding a needle in a haystack of 100 pages. And it's just not something we're very good at. So I think you'll see both better work product, lower time spent on drudgery and reading and copying and pasting, and more time for lawyers to work on the more strategic work, which again adds more value to the client. If the lawyer is able to spend more time on, say, the human negotiation element, that can provide a lot more value to the client than the lawyer, spending their time copying and pasting Microsoft Word.
So do you foresee in the future that as this tool advances and it does speed up all the work time, do you think that would make the legal pricing more affordable in certain areas to clients?
Yes, 100%. And that's like the mission of our company when we started was to make legal services accessible. That is like our actual top level mission. And we're doing it by reducing all the drudgery for lawyers, because lawyers don't feel good about sometimes what they're billing either. And my co-founder, Dan, he's the lawyer on the team, and he went through law school and then was billing clients, hundreds of dollars per hour to copy and paste Microsoft Word. And he didn't feel good about that. For me, I had a small business before I started Spellbook. And one day I got a legal bill that took half the cash out of my bank account and to do some like pretty rudimentary things. And that was a really surprising moment. So yes, I think the price of legal services will generally come down a lot where it's price sensitive. Now, in big law and really large transactions, and if you're doing, say, a $50 million transaction, people are less worried about how fast does it take and is it cheap enough? And people are more worried about quality. So it depends on the type of transaction. If you're a small coffee shop and you're just figuring out how to get incorporated and how to get your business set up, you're going to get lower prices. People are going to be able to do those basic things more efficiently. If you're like Coca-Cola and you're trying to do a big M&A transaction or something like that, and it's worth $100 million, you probably don't care that much about the legal fees. What you do care about is that everything is done really, really well and that nothing is missed. And I think in both those circumstances, AI is going to be really helpful.
From your experience, I know that we're still trying to get some good regulations and laws around use of AI. So from your experience, what should lawyers be looking at and listening to? I know we've seen some recent bills come through in regard to AI. How does that weigh in?
I think we should be looking at regulation. I think it is still very early to understand how these technologies are going to impact the world, and I'm nervous a little bit that we're going to kind of react too early. I think you've seen some early kicks at the can for regulation that just didn't end up making a lot of sense based on how the industry has already evolved. In terms of our customers and our company, we don't see any threats or issues on the horizon. Like, for instance, we don't use any customer data for training our models. I think that's probably the biggest concern in law is my data being used to train a model? And is my client, or actually more important, is my client data being used to train a model? And I think that's an important area where there should be some kind of regulation and oversight, because people don't want their information baked into these models and spit back out, in a way that they didn't know was going to happen. So I think that's really important. We already, as a company, have all sorts of safeguards into place to make sure that doesn't happen, and we just don't use customer data for training at all. Except we do allow firms to have sort of their own personalized model. So I think because of new advancements in AI, like in context learning, we are now at a point where, say, each of our customers can have their own personalized system that has learned based on their own data, but just for them, not shared with anyone else. In the early stages of LLM and generative AI, you would have, all of the data being funneled into one model, and then everyone uses that one model. But now, because I know that there's something you've talked about on the show, but now context windows are very, very big, which means when we go to use an AI model, we can shove a ton of extra information into there. And that allows us to do something called in-context learning, which means, when law firm A goes to use Spellbook, we can actually stuff in all their preferences into their use of Spellbook, and they can get hyper-personalized results out, while we're not actually doing any, say, training per se, and we're not sharing any of that data with any other customer, and that can be done in a really tight and controlled way. So all that's to say, I think privacy is probably like the most important aspect of regulation right now. I think we're very prepared as a company to provide very privacy-friendly solutions to our customers. So we're not too nervous about the regulation.
Awesome. Well, if there's one key takeaway you could leave with our audience today, what would that be?
It's a great question. I think AI agents are the next big thing. That's something we didn't get to talk about too much. And I'm sure you've talked about agents on here, but we're another company that really, really deeply believes that AI agents are kind of the next big thing. I think it's going to be bigger than ChatGPT was, because we're going to go from having these chat assistants that help us here and there to now having sort of these AI colleagues that can take on whole projects. And we actually launched the first full-fledged agent for legal work as well. It's called Spellbook Associate. We're seeing early reactions from lawyers, and now these agents can go and do these complex multi-document drafting workflows. And it's like the reactions we're getting from our customers are just totally, their minds are blown as much as when they first saw ChatGPT. So I think that's the biggest thing that we're seeing now is like agents are really real. They're definitely coming. It feels so much like ChatGPT and LMs in the early days. There's this skepticism in the air. Is it really going to work? Is it really reliable? These are all the things you heard when GPT-3 came out, and no one was sure if it was going to work, and then it did. And then GPT-4 came out, and so on. I think you're seeing the same thing with agents now. Now the O1 model just came out, which is really good for powering these agentic workflows. So yeah, I think in 2025, we're just going to see a ton of adoption of agent-based tech. And yeah, it's going to be like we have AI colleagues.
Awesome. It will be interesting to see how that technology unfolds. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on our show and sharing your insights with us today.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Amanda.
All right. And thank you to our audience. Stay tuned. There's more.